Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We are broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, and on TikTok. Folks, this is the show where we are British, we love the United Kingdom, and we want to stay together. And if that's you, please keep watching. And if that's not you, please keep watching anyway, because you might learn something. We've got a great show tonight. As always, we are teleprompter free. We've got our guest coming up at 7:30, which is Ash, that Preston journalist who's a favourite of the show. And of course, we're going to be talking about the inquiry today that Sturgeon was sitting in front of. And Ash and I are going to be talking all about that. And we want to hear what your thoughts were as well on that particular matter. That's the big news story, and we'll be getting to that at the bottom of the hour with our guest Ash, that Preston journalist. Now, before then, we're going to be looking at a big report that came out yesterday by the Office of National Statistics that says that the British population is due to reach 70 million 10 years earlier than it was hitherto thought to reach. And that's actually big news, because it's going to reach officially 70 million in 2026, which is just a couple of years away instead of 2036. And that's the official figures, right? So what are the actual figures when you get right down to it? So we're going to be talking about that, and then we're going to be talking about on this day in British history, because this is an auspicious day. This is the Great British Brexit Day. Do you remember 4 years ago in 2020 on the 31st of January, when the clock struck 11 p.m, Britain formally left the EU. So that's the Great British Brexit Day that happened on this day. So we'll be talking more about that. And we'll be asking a question about that for our competition, as always, at the bottom of the hour, which is for this Union Jack fridge magnet. It wasn't won last week, but you can win it this week by sending in your answer to contact@aforceforgood.uk. And we'll also be throwing in, of course, our latest magazine, which is King and Country. So folks, tell us what you thought of the inquiry today, if any of you watched it. Now, Debbie was first in, and Debbie clearly watched it. She says, "Good evening, everyone. How good was King's Counsel Jamie Dawson? Made Sturgeon cry many times." Well, that's true. Sturgeon did appear to be on the absolute brink of tears at least a couple of times. Derek says, "Cranky went to the dock today." TC says, "Good evening, Alistair and all fellow Unionists everywhere." Good evening to you, TC, and to Catherine, who says hi, and to Christopher from Falkirk. An interesting and highly revealing day in the inquiry, wasn't it just? Because Sturgeon finally admitted that she had, in fact, deleted her WhatsApp messages. We'll be getting to that with our guest at the bottom of the hour. Derek's looking forward to seeing Ash again. Hi to Derek Hamilton from Armadale. And to Stephen, who says it's an excellent magnet. It absolutely is an excellent magnet with an excellent design on it. We do like our Union Jacks here in the office, as many of you will be able to see in the background. Happy Brexit Day. Happy Brexit Day to you, Derek. Stephen says the tears that Sturgeon were crying were false tears, and they just show she's a manipulative person. Save your tears. I heard a really good song, Save Your Tears by The Weeknd. I heard that last week. That was a great song. TC, 4 years ago today, I was in Parliament Square with the good people from Unity News Network. Excellent. Didn't know that, TC. What a fantastic time we had in Whitehall that day and night. Well, absolutely. And as we'll be talking about at the bottom of the hour, we, A Force for Good, organised the Scottish equivalent of that in George Square. And we've got some pictures of that coming up later in the programme. And they went worldwide. They were excellent pictures. And so we showed the world that Scotland was for Brexit as well, and over 1 million people in Scotland voted for Brexit, despite the entire political and media establishment being totally opposed to it. Over 1 million Scots, including many SNP supporters, still voted for Brexit. That just tells you. Imagine if any prominent politician in Scotland had been for it. It would have been even more people voting for it. Catherine says it's the tears of a clown. That's a song, isn't it? That was the Everly Brothers, I think. Hey to Ryan. Good evening to you in the West Riding of Yorkshire. Okay, so I want to just start with these figures from the Office of National Statistics that came out yesterday. And what these were saying is that it's forecasting that due to record levels of immigration, the UK's population will hit 70 million in 2026. That's the official population. So the actual population will be more than that. And not 2036 as previously projected. So 10 years earlier, it hits that figure. And in the next 10 years after that, it's projected to rise to at least 76 million. Due hugely to immigration. Now this is astonishing, and these are figures that most people don't actually know. Now we've got a table here from the ONS that we'll just put up that just summarises what I've just said to you, and let's have a look at it, and we're going to decide what can be done about this ultimately and what should be done. There we go. Focusing on the 15 years between mid-21 and mid-2036, the total projected growth for the UK population is 6.6 million. Remember, that's official, but it could be more, of course. During this period, the projections for the UK as a whole suggest, and it tells you who will be born, how many will die, how many will immigrate long term, and how many will emigrate. And this means that of the projected 6.6 million increase in the total population, 500,000 is projected to result from the higher numbers of births than deaths, and 6.1 million, which is to say 92% of the total projected increase, is projected to result from net international migration. Okay. Now, net, of course, means the difference between those going out and those coming in. So that's a lot. That's an awful lot of people. And the question is always asked, well, why does the government have absolutely no policy about this? Does it actually care about it? Is it just sitting back and saying, well, let's just see what the numbers are? Or is it working to a plan to either deliberately increase, or if it's not working to a plan to deliberately increase, does it have a plan to keep it at a certain level? Because governments can do that. Governments can nudge things, and they can make policies which can reach targets. That's the whole point of government. The point of government isn't just to sit back and let the country be overrun, as it were. The point of a government is to set a population target and work towards it, whether to limit it or to increase it or to lower it or what have you. That's the purpose of government. They have all those levers in their hands. And there's not that many people commenting in an intelligent way on this on the internet, but one man that is making a good job of it is a fellow called Matt Goodwin, who seems to have set himself the task of analysing these figures. And he made some really good points in the last 48 hours, one or two of which I'm just going to quote back at you. And he says, quote, "This population explosion, driven overwhelmingly by immigration, will be equivalent in size to 5 cities the size of Birmingham, or adding a population twice the size of Wales, and it will unfold in just 12 years. Okay, adding a population twice the size of Wales to Britain within the next 12 years. And then he adds, there's also a very good chance this forecast by the ONS is actually underplaying the scale of change that's about to unfold. The net migration figures which underpin the forecast are less than half of what net migration has been in recent years." So that's a remarkable thing. Now, several years ago, in 2006, I wrote an article. This was before A Force for Good was developed, and I said that it should be the goal of government to, quote, develop a population policy. And I looked at why this was happening, and I looked at the point of government and what it should be doing. And I wrote the following. I said, and every single word applies to today. I said, these figures mean that the entry of people into Britain is out of control. The situation is favoured by the ultra-free marketeers who want total freedom of movement, and by the internationalists who do not believe in the idea of nations or borders or distinct peoples or anything like that for various ideological points of view. And the situation is sustained by a governing class in politics and media who work to limit political debate on this matter, and it's informed by an intellectual orthodoxy built largely upon anti-racism as a theory. So, in the face of what we're facing today, this open border anarchy, what we need is a population policy which is a clear statement of purpose and which is driven according to long-term social and economic and political goals. And not one of our governments in the past 50 years has ever had such a thing. But it would reflect a coherent vision of our desired demographic future, and it would provide the rules intended to move us towards such a future. For example, it would enable us to decide how many immigrants we want, how many are considered to be necessary, and it would decide who should be admitted and in accord with what particular criteria. And so that would involve all of us in discussions about these things. It would challenge those who prefer to emote about diversity or a virtue signal about anti-racism. Instead, it would favour those who want to do real economic, social, demographic and environmental research on the consequences and the purposes of such immigration. It would also require people to justify the numbers as well, why they should be big or small or net zero. And it would challenge the politicians and the media who have an unspoken agreement to keep this topic off the public agenda. And it would challenge the underlying myths of quote-unquote anti-racism which have underpinned this topic since probably the end of World War II. And without a population policy. Without such a policy, the country has no direction. There is no way of judging what the future holds, and society is destabilised both physically and also psychologically. And so that's what we need. We need our governments to have a population policy so we know why this is happening and if it can be changed. And there's not a single Tory or Labour person who's got such an agenda, and certainly Keir Starmer does not have that, neither does Rishi Sunak. They just seem to let events unfold to the detriment of the entire society. Now, going back to Matt Goodwin, he did actually make an interesting point, and I'm going to run this past you. He said that Rishi Sunak and the Tories are essentially doomed at this forthcoming general election, and the only thing that Rishi Sunak can do to perhaps rescue his party is to go into the general election offering, and what do you think of this, offering a referendum on immigration. What would be the question of such a referendum? What would be asked? What would be the question that we have to answer? Who knows? But essentially, the purpose of that would be to get people to vote for the Conservatives in the hope that if they were to be re-elected, they would hold a referendum on presumably limiting immigration below a certain number. And if they won that referendum, then they would then be able to claim a democratic mandate to carry out the policies that would deliver that goal. So that's an interesting point of view, and he made a good few points about it in an article which can be read on Matt Goodwin's Substack. And he said that immigration is now emerging as the major divide in Western policies, and if you offered a referendum to the people on it, you would quote unquote get on the right side of it. And I think that's an interesting idea, but I think what Matt Goodwin doesn't understand is that Rishi Sunak and a great number of the Tories don't actually want to stop immigration. That's the problem I think that we're facing in many cases. There's a lot on the front bench who are not that bothered about it at all and are happy just to sit back and let it happen. So it would require Sunak himself having a complete change of view on that matter. And at this stage, would anybody take him seriously anyway? Anyway, I thought that was worth pointing out. That was his idea. Maybe we'll hear more about that. But wouldn't it just be nice to have a normal government that had a population policy and that was able to control the numbers of people that are coming into the country without us having to think up wheezies like referendums on immigration? And I tell you something else about the Scottish nationalists on this, and this was something that occurred to me yesterday. They are completely, most of them, and I'm talking about their supporters, if you're a Scottish nationalist and you live in a wee rural village in Scotland, you are completely divorced from this topic. You have no idea what you're talking about, because you look about your little wee village somewhere in Scotland, anywhere in Scotland essentially, and you don't see an immigration problem. And so this is just for you an abstract concept. And I notice that when I'm looking at comments that come into our posts on the internet. These are clearly people who are not living in the big cities in Scotland. They're certainly not living in the area of Glasgow that I live in. They're living in their wee, virtually 100% white, nice wee villages in Scotland, and they look about and they go, why are people obsessing about immigration? It doesn't look like it's immigration to me. It doesn't look to me like it's an issue. And that's so many of these Scottish nationalists who do very well for themselves, by the way. A lot of them are retired. They've got 2 cars at the front of the house, little detached houses in these lovely Scottish villages. Oh, everything's hunky-dory for them, so they're totally divorced. So when somebody like Hamza Yusuf stands up and goes that, controlling immigration is some sort of weird right-wing fetish, they just go along with that because they don't know any better. Yeah, let's have a look at some of your comments, what you guys are saying about it. Ryan says, a force for good also made a great point just a few days ago in relation that the entire industry around human rights law in relation to illegal immigration ought to be specifically defunded and delegitimised. Too many human rights lawyers have gotten fat off the UK taxpayer for far too long. That's right, we made that point in one of our Facebook posts. There's so many NGOs, which is to say non-governmental organisations, which are receiving taxpayers' money from the present government in order to perpetuate the immigration and asylum issue, and very often to argue against government policy, and very often to encourage even more of it. And yet they're being paid by the government. The government shows no inclination whatsoever to defund these NGOs. We put up an article on our Facebook page yesterday about an organisation called the Paul Hamlyn Foundation, which has £900 million worth of assets. It's one of the big funders, private funders, of all of these pro-immigration NGOs. And yet the Paul Hamlyn Foundation, with almost £1 billion worth of assets, received, let me get the figure right, received £1 million from the British government, received 1.36 million in government grants since 2020. Okay, so our Tory government is paying an NGO that's got almost £1 billion worth of assets, paying them 1.36 million of our taxpayers' money for this Paul Hamlyn Foundation to in fact argue against the policies of the government on matters of immigration. You could not make that up. It's beyond belief. Stephen says that he agrees that the Conservatives don't want to stop uncontrolled mass immigration. Hey to Alan. Yes, Adam says, what's happening to our wee English villages will shortly happen to the ones in Scotland. Just you watch. Well, we know, Adam, you're right. Christopher comes in. Most Scottish nationalists are divorced from reality and economics. Ashton says on TikTok, do you believe that Scottish independent movements are dying down in Glasgow? There's much less sign of it. Definitely it's quieter. It's quieter, and quite a few of them are taking a back seat now. They can't get the numbers to their marches or to their meetings. Adam wonders how the UK can control its southern border with France without being penalised by foreign courts. Look at what Australia did with their Papua New Guinea policy. Got condemned, but it somehow worked. I don't know about that policy, Adam, but presumably Australia was not tied in to an organisation and a legal system such as the European Convention on Human Rights, and we can't control our southern border with France so long as we remain part of the ECHR. That's just a fact that neither the Tories nor Labour want to acknowledge, because to do so and to leave the ECHR would overthrow the post-war legal settlement, and they don't want to do that because that would be a whole new direction that the world would be taking. And that's the crux of the matter, is breaking free from the things that were set up after World War II, which are no longer fit for purpose, no longer reflective of the new situation of the world today. So all of that has to just go, and that's going to be an ideological revolution, which our present system is not able yet to grasp, certainly not to do. But it will do it, but just how long it's going to take, who knows. But things could move very quickly on that front. Ryan says that the government should consider replacing the Human Rights Act with a British Charter of Basic Rights. Not that they will, and I shan't hold my breath, he says. But Adam comes back, but if France was to actually do a French Brexit and leave Schengen and impose harsh border checks on their eastern and southern borders, could mean better control, and we won't have to worry about illegal crossings on its northern border with the UK. Yes, we'll obviously have to keep in touch with France in some way and help them help us. James just says it's a namby-pamby state because the politicians are trying in vain to pander to everyone. Now, today, oh crikey, it's later than I thought. What I'll do firstly, we're going to bring Ash on. We're just quickly going to run through on this day in British history. Ash, we may have to just hold you over for 2 or 3 minutes. I hope you don't mind. I see you're in the green room at the moment, but we'll keep you going for the same amount of time when we speak to you anyway. Now, on this day in British history is, of course, the Great British Brexit Day of the 31st of January. And let's put aside whether actually Brexit delivered what we thought it was going to deliver, or whether Brexit has really happened. What, of course, with the carry on with the Northern Irish sea border and things like that, which are absolutely abysmal and terrible. Let's just concentrate on the fact that it was the formal leaving of the EU. And so that was on this day. Now, a force for good, what we did was we organised the Great British Brexit Day celebration in George Square, and it began at just at 10:30 at night. We had a speech. I gave a speech which took us up to the bells at 11, and then we had a party, and we've got a 1-minute video of that which we're just going to play for you. See what you think of this. Brings back memories 4 years ago today. There you go. I noticed we said there in our speech that it was going to be the beginning of the end for separation for the Scottish Nationalists. And I think, well, it may well have been the beginning of the end, because the urgency in their cause has certainly fallen away. Well, from about that date, to be quite frank. So that was on this day. What we also had on this day, earlier that morning, the Scottish Nationalists had decided that they were going to go to the Auld Acquaintance Cairn, which is a cairn built by Unionists just outside Gretna. And the Scottish Nationalists were going to go and festoon it with their yes flags as a kind of rebellion against Brexit. But we got wind of that, and we sent down 5 of our troopers down there who arrived before them, and we were able to festoon the cairn before the Scottish Nationalists arrived. And when the Scottish Nationalists arrived and they saw us, they actually left and they went over to the motorway, and they stood at the side of the motorway in the pouring rain, getting laughed at and looking bedraggled and looking just a sorry sight. So we basically drove them away from the Auld Acquaintance Cairn just outside Gretna. And let's just put up some pictures of that. Here we go. That's the cairn. I don't know how many of you have been down there to see it. That was the cairn on the day. There's a couple of the small group of us that were there. And there's the Scottish Nationalists having been sent on their merry way, standing forlorn and unloved beside the motorway. So that was earlier on this day back in 2020. Okay, now after we've spoken to Ash, we'll show you some pictures of the Brexit Day celebration. And let's bring on our man Ash. Ladies and gentlemen, please say a welcome to Ash, that Preston journalist.
Evening, Alistair. Evening, everyone. You all right?
Very well, thanks, Ash. Yes, you've had a busy day today.
I've had a good day today.
Yes, I think we've all had a good day today. What with the inquiry and Sturgeon's appearance before it. I don't know how much you've seen of the inquiry, but what were your immediate thoughts so far of what's going on?
I didn't think she'd burst into tears the way she did, but what was his name? Jamie Dawson, is that right?
Jamie Dawson, yes.
Yeah, did an absolutely outstanding job, and no politician really wants to cry in public. That's not what you do, because it makes you look weak. It makes you look pretty pathetic in the eyes of the public as well. So I don't think it was planned, to be honest with you. Although I think it was a desperate ruse. She had absolutely nowhere to go. Everything she'd ever said, everything she'd ever lied about was laid bare in front of the entire nation. And everyone knew that at this part of the inquiry, nobody cared what Humza Yousaf said or Kate Forbes said, really. What they cared about was what Sturgeon was going to say. And she backed herself into such a corner that even she, who, let's face it, was a pretty shrewd operator in the past, she was lost for words completely. She had nowhere to go apart from burst into tears, realising not what she'd done to Scotland, to the Scottish people, to education or the NHS or anything like that, but what she'd done to herself. I put in a video today saying that I truly believe now, and I absolutely believe this, we're seeing the last, finally, of Nicola Sturgeon. Her only income now is her job as an MSP. And I think she'll have some brass neck if she wants to stand for re-election again. Because who wants her after this? She's not just lied to... I mean, we'd expect it. We see right through it. But her own supporters, sure to God, unless they've bought their brain cells on some sort of eBay auction, must see now what this woman really is. Just a con artist who's done nothing for them over the years, apart from use their money, which they donated for, all right, they believed in something, they donated money. She's bought Jaguars, camper vans, allegedly, and she's had a very merry time of it at their expense, and now she's got nothing left.
Indeed. That was your video, which people can watch on your youtube.com/that Preston Journalist site, is certainly a tour de force in a couple of minutes. You really do slate her. You what was it you called her? Cranky's crocodile tears, which I had a laugh about. But I think the word that's been suggested to me that describes her performance is disingenuous. which is probably a good word. Basically, she knew that when she was doing all these messages, she knew that there would likely be an inquiry sometime in the future, in a year or two's hence. She knew that, so that's no doubt. Afterwards she thought, oh crikey, I shouldn't have written that, or shouldn't have said that, I don't want people to see that, and so on. So that would be one of the reasons that she deleted them. And maybe she thinks that these sorts of messages shouldn't have been made public anyway, but she would surely know that in this day and age of freedom of information and all that sort of thing, that anything a politician says is going to come out eventually, especially when it's discussions among her so-called cabinet. That's going to come out. So the deletion thing, and the fact that she for so long tried to avoid the question of whether she deliberately deleted them or not, is really quite remarkable. I got today. She, however, she finally admitted it, and we've got the Sturgeon transcript that we'll put up where she actually admits it. But it took a long time for her to do it. Here it is. Dawson asked, what's that messages between yourself and Mr. Youssef were produced by you with blah blah blah, where did you get them, blah blah. Moving down, let's get rid of that YouTube Preston Journalist thing, because that's where I want to. There we go. So the last paragraph, Sturgeon says, I was very thorough, not just in the pandemic, but in all my work in government, to ensure that things were appropriately recorded. But in line with the advice I'd always been given since my first day in government, probably was not to retain conversations like that on a phone that could be lost or stolen and therefore not secure. She's good at that, in talking a lot and trying to justify herself without actually asking a question. But here she got pressed on it by Dawson, who said, but did you delete them? And Sturgeon says, yes. So that's finally we get the information that she had deleted them. And about time too. Do you think she's going to suffer any consequences of having deleted them in this way?
Well, given that the establishment in this country are held to a different standard to what you or I or anybody watching this is held to, probably not. But she certainly should. She's tried saying that she didn't get the Do Not Destroy order from Westminster, which is given out to all devolved administrations and Westminster themselves, obviously, because everyone knew there'd be an inquiry, as you said, sooner or later. And she said she never got that message. Well, it doesn't matter, does it? Because whatever she's doing on government time, being paid by you and I and everybody else, the fact is, nothing is private. You're working on our time, being paid by our pound. Every message you send, every phone call you make has to be available, possibly to go public. She knew. She's not stupid. She's many things, but she isn't stupid. She knew that these messages had to be kept. That's why she's tried lying. She's tried saying at first she didn't have a government phone. It turns out she didn't. She was using her own personal phone, which, if you remember Hillary Clinton, when she went up against Trump, that cost her an election. You're not really allowed to do that. She should face consequences for that alone, because those messages can contain sensitive information in them, of course. She then tried saying she never had WhatsApp. That never works, because people like Kate Forbes were all too willing to put forward messages and conversations with Sturgeon on WhatsApp. And if you watched Kate Forbes, by the way, giving her evidence at the inquiry, she was struggling to hold back her smiles as she threw everybody under the bus one by one, who she could possibly want to get rid of, who stands in her way of becoming the next leader. She couldn't wait to give the evidence. It was almost like she was having a conversation with Jamie Dawson, and they were just bitching about everybody that had been in the devolved administration before. It was actually, I don't know, I've got no time for Kate Forbes, but it was actually quite funny to watch.
Yes.
But no, I don't think she will face any consequences, just like I don't think Boris Johnson will. I don't think Keir Starmer will. We know Starmer broke the rules, but he got off with it for whatever reason. And no, I don't think any of them will, but they should do, because obviously this country is now in economically, well, I can't think of a bad enough word to describe it, the state our economy's in. And it's all down to these people and their rule making. I don't want to get the channel in trouble. You're not getting at the rules they created at the time that have left us in the economic situation that we're in now.
Yes. And all of these decisions that she made were, although she would say they were about public health, she was also angling for the political position as well. How does this make us look, well, different, really? Not even necessarily better, but different. So it wasn't just a matter of public health. It was also, she was using it as a political tool. Now, I noticed that she totally denied that when she was asked something to that end by the KC Jamie Dawson. She said it was really just about public health, but that didn't really wash with me at all. She saw it as a way of making the distinction between Scotland and England. And in fact, there was a good article in today's Daily Mail by Eddie Barnes, who spoke about the psychological term called the narcissism of small differences, which apparently is some kind of Freudian theory. But it's where you need to emphasize the tiny differences. When things are so alike, in order to distinguish yourself, you have to emphasize the tiny differences. And as he put it, I'll just quote it here from his article in today's Mail. It is this need to emphasize the tiny, indeed often imaginary differences that exist between Scotland and England that has defined the Sturgeon-style period in power and continued by Humza Yousaf. It's a belief system that must be pursued even when there is no sense to it. The truth is Scotland and England aren't very different. It's a reality the SNP can't bear. And by obsessing over the minor differences between us, the upshot is that they've distracted Scotland from tackling the big challenges we face.
Well, they've created a lot of them, haven't they, themselves?
Yes, exactly.
Up until last week, I put a video out. I genuinely believed they were softening people up in Scotland for the return of Sturgeon, like Cranky the Second, if you will. She was going to come back. Humza Yousaf as the continuity candidate, who, let's face it, hasn't steered away from her agenda one little bit, even attempting to fight the government again on this disastrous gender recognition reform bill, which he's now given up on, thankfully. But I believed he was simply put there to keep the seat warm until she thought it was right, or the party thought it was right, to put her back in place again, and she'd come back on her white horse and start chanting independence again. Next 5 years, all that rubbish, blah, blah, blah. And I genuinely thought that's what they were going to do. But now I think they're going to be lost, because there's no way, after this evidence that she's given, which has made her look beyond corrupt. She's been, we've always called her a liar and stuff. We knew she was a liar. But now she's proven to be a liar. She's had to admit to lying in a public inquiry. There's no way back for her in the public eye. Honestly, I'll be surprised if she stands again as an MSP. I mean, she might do, because she's got a big enough ego for it. But I'd be very surprised if she's got any income left after this. Who's going to want her? The UN can't take her now because they're in enough trouble themselves. The WEF won't take her, and that's the sort of rubbish that she was hoping for after politics.
That's a good point. She's got a book deal that she's getting paid fairly handsomely with, but I'm not sure how many years that will keep her in high heels and and books. Apparently she says she loves to read, that's a big hobby apparently, and when she was First Minister, she used to be posting not every night, but on Twitter, like, pile of books that she's just read, and the books would never have they weren't creased, they're like, the spines were not creased in any way. So somehow she was able to read these books without like opening them or creasing them. She must have just been able to absorb the information through osmosis or something like that. But Derek says that she should quit politics and face jail.
She should, but she won't.
No.
She probably will stand for re-election again, because her ego is just incredible, isn't it? She will stand again, I imagine.
I would tend to think that she probably will, unless she's got another offer that pays better. She'd certainly. There's a lot of people who support her. I mean, Nicola's army. There's a lot of people who still support her, come what may. And the sorts of things that we've heard today, they don't care about, so they'll continue to support her. But whether she would have the brass neck to do that, and she might just be sick of politics as well after all of this. I wouldn't necessarily blame her if she decided to go away and just live a quiet life.
Well, look, I know there are, of course, there's still people that support her. I know there are quite a few, but when she arrived today, and by the way, when she arrived, I mean, is there anything legal about this woman whatsoever? I mean, not only is she, in my opinion, completely and utterly bent, but she arrived in a car without an MOT. There is nothing legal about this woman. She is just one big bag of corruption. Everything she does is corrupt. I can't think of anything she's ever done, honestly. But anyway, outside the inquiry, she was heckled and booed as she walked in. When she walked out, she was heckled and booed. There was no one there waving the Scottish flag around and cheering her as she walked out.
Yes.
Not a single person. She was heckled and booed the entire time. It just shows how far her star has fallen, in my opinion, anyway.
Oh, well, I think your opinion is mirrored by an awful lot of people as well. How far she's fallen since back when she was the star of the show, which was, I mean, that whole period between 2020 and 2021, it really made her a household name. In fact, it probably made her too famous because, she insisted on addressing the nation as if she was like Winston Churchill or something like that every day from her high horse or her high platform, telling us how she's, come up with the latest concoction to save us all that particular day. And it just became tiring. And
well,
then,
maybe, sorry to interrupt you, maybe if she hadn't been so big-headed and so full of herself, and every time she got out of a Cobra briefing, over it was with the UK government, if she hadn't been the first to try and rush to a camera all the time and make sure that everything was about her, then she wouldn't have been hoisted upon her own petard like she is now. Maybe she could have said, well, I was advised to do this, advised to do that, etc., but she can't, because she insisted on putting herself front and centre every time, every time something happened, every time a policy was to be announced or some advice came out from Westminster or anywhere else. She had to be the first to announce it, and she had to stand. Don't forget, she was doing these silly daily briefings for much longer than anybody else. She carried on for so long, and that's, as I just said, she's been hoisted upon her own petard because she wanted all this fame and attention. It's me, 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 me. Well, now it is all her, and it's a complete and utter mess, isn't it?
That's actually a very good point. A cleverer politician would have not sought the limelight so enthusiastically, especially not on such a controversial matter, and would have played the kind of been above it all and would make occasional appearances.
Yeah, a statement role. Yeah, statesman's role. Sorry.
Exactly. But no, she had to be front and centre, in your face, every single waking moment.
Who was Health Secretary in Scotland at the time? Was it useless?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. But what was that Jason Leach guy? What was his job?
Well, he's a dentist, isn't he? God knows why he was even there in the first place. I think he was there because he's pals with Sturgeon, as far as I know. He's always been quite friendly with the SNP.
Yeah. He made some kind of comment. I'll just bring it up here. Niall just retweeted something by the journalist Chris Musson, who says, staggering, the face of the Scottish so-called government pandemic response, Professor Jason Leach having a laugh with officials about wiping his WhatsApp and clearing group chats. And there, that's obviously a WhatsApp message on the screen, and Jason Leach's sign off there is, WhatsApp deletion is a pre-bed ritual. Ha ha ha.
Look at the smiling, the zipped up mouth face there. I mean,
yes,
these people were taking the you-know-what, weren't they? It's absolutely unbelievable.
Ken Thompson, that was he occupied one of these made-up roles in the Scottish executive, extremely well remunerated, and he was, don't ask me what he did, but it was just another kind of tacky job.
I suppose the fact that me and you can't name between us who the Scottish Health Minister or Health Secretary was at the time really proves the point.
It does.
They should have been the ones front and centre. Like, Matt Hancock probably did as much, if not more, than Boris Johnson in these press conferences. And whatever you think of him, it was his responsibility because he was in charge of health at the time.
Yes.
Whereas you never saw anybody in Scotland apart from the dentist and Sturgeon who were just giving snide remarks to journalists. And
there was this other woman, a younger woman who had some kind of qualification that we were all supposed to about. What was her? I mean, what's she doing there? Like, who cares about this person? But she got all the attention as well. So it was the three of them. That's the three that I remember. And I was thinking, like, why are these strange people talking to me? I don't get it.
You'll notice she's nowhere to be seen. She's gone missing off the face of the earth ever since the pandemic because she came out so strongly in favour of Sturgeon, calling her the best politician in the world and all this stuff. And now she's, again, is another one who sought the limelight, maybe in Sturgeon's shadow, I suppose, but sought the limelight nonetheless. And now she's scared to appear in public. No doubt she'll be summoned to this inquiry at some point.
Yeah, that would be an interesting one. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Catherine says, on form tonight, Ash. Got a lot to be on form for.
This is it.
Did you, I don't know if you heard my... I was talking there about, to change the subject, Matt Goodwin is suggesting that Rishi Sunak should promise a referendum on immigration in order to outflank Labour, very much in the way that David Cameron outflanked UKIP prior to the 2015 general election, where he was going to lose a lot to UKIP. So what he did was he came up with a ruse that he would promise a referendum on Brexit. And he consequently took all of UKIP's votes at the general election in 2015, and they had the Brexit referendum in 2016, which didn't exactly go the way that Cameron had planned. But do you think that Rishi Sunak could be saved if he promised a referendum on a referendum that proposed to restrict immigration to a certain lower level? Or do you think Rishi Sunak's perhaps too far gone now?
I think it's twofold. Firstly, I think Rishi Sunak is disliked not necessarily because of himself, but because of the way that he took power and planned it months and months before Boris even resigned. He planned to take over Boris's job anyway, regardless of what was going on at the time. He didn't get the job that he wanted because Liz Truss beat him. The membership didn't want him. And then he took it by force anyway. So that's something that people don't like. The democratic will of this country, which was to vote Boris Johnson in, was taken away from the people, making the general election almost, null and void, if you will. But then Matt Goodwin is sort of right. Maybe offering a referendum could claw back a few points. But if you look at Cameron's promise in 2010, excuse me, I got a bit of a cold. Cameron's promise in 2010 was to reduce net migration figures down to the tens of thousands. It's now shot up to what? Best part of 700,000 every single year. So people have effectively been voting for a Tory government since 2010 that's going to reduce immigration. But all we're seeing is these numbers going through the roof. And if you look at PMQs and stuff, the one subject that neither Starmer nor Sunak will talk about is immigration. And that maybe if he offer... Can you really offer a referendum on something that you've been promising for the last 13 years, 14 years anyway, and haven't done anything about?
Do you know, that's actually a very good point. A very good point indeed. It's like, why don't they just say, look, we're going to do this, and then do it? We've now got to the stage where we just don't believe, unfortunately, that the parties will do what they say. And we've got years of evidence on that, particularly on this matter. So it would to me it would seem like a very insincere gesture But if they did it, they would have to follow through with it. And then if they lost the referendum, which is to say the people actually said, yeah, we would like much, much lower immigration, then would that be sufficient for them to say, okay, now we're actually going to have to do something about it?
Personally, I think not, no. I don't think it would.
No.
I mean, he's got to do something drastic, definitely, because he's got reform now as well behind him on, 13%. You're talking single figures now behind the Tories, and they seem to be gaining week on week. And I said this had happened because they brought Ben Habib in, who is a brilliant political operator, and he speaks much better than Richard Tice or Dr. David Bull or any of them. He's a very, very clever man, and he knows exactly what he's talking about. And like you, I actually watch Matt Goodwin quite a bit. He speaks very well as well.
Yes,
in fact, Rishi Sunak could do a lot worse than bringing Matt Goodwin in to try and save him. But I think if you wanted to offer a referendum to try and turn the fortunes around, I'd be offering it on net zero and say, do you want the 2050? The question is, should Britain have the 2050 or whatever it is, 2035? Is it 2050 still? I don't know. Net zero targets, and then or should we ditch them and carry on as we are now? And that is a referendum, I think, that would get people's interest, and that is something that people would go for.
Yeah, that's another good point. Yeah.
I know it's changing the subject a bit, but I think you get a lot of people on board with that, and I can tell you which way it'd go now. The establishment, once again, would tell us to vote for net zero, but the public, and it'd be a bigger margin than 52-48 as well. You'd be talking 65-35, something like that, easily, in favour of ditching net zero.
Yeah, exactly, especially when it was made clear that ditching net zero is going to make your family and home bills considerably cheaper than what they are, and that it's only going to keep rising under the present system.
Well, even the government, the Office of Budget Responsibility, Office for National Statistics, none of them can put a figure on how much is going to cost this country or each individual taxpayer to do this net zero rubbish. Not one of them can tell us, and that's because the figures are so astronomical that even they can't imagine it. So what's it going to cost you and me? We've already seen our bills go through the roof once.
Yes.
That's my opinion.
Your opinion's worth hearing, that's for sure, as everybody seems to agree. TC says, always love listening to Ash. Eric comes in here with a point about the immigration. The problem is the courts. Even if the people voted in favour in a referendum, it still won't go through because it will be taken to court. Then the Supreme Court will rule in favour of the so-called human rights lawyers. Really, the solution is reforming the Human Rights Act when it comes to things like asylum seekers.
I wonder if you could do it and make it a legally binding referendum. Like they always said that the Brexit referendum was just advisory, didn't it?
Advisory, yeah.
Yeah. So if you could make it legally binding, then I wonder if that would bypass the courts or prevent any appeals. I'm not really sure, but possibly.
Yeah, there's never been such a thing, as far as I'm aware, in British history, as a legally binding referendum. They are all just advisory. At least that's the convention. It's never been written into law that the government has to do a particular thing as a consequence of a referendum, and which in some ways is maybe just as well, because sometimes circumstances, the theory is that circumstances can change, so you can't bind a government to do something in case the circumstance at that time that it has to do it is in fact different from when it promised it. Yeah. And that's why politicians should never make promises, actually. If you're a good politician, the best you can say is, I'm going to aim to do that. But if you make a promise...
keep your powder dry.
Yeah, if you make a promise and then a year later circumstances are completely different, economically or politically or whatever, that you can't do it, then you're going to get, as you used the phrase, hoist on your own petard at a later time. So it's best to always be honest, of course, but not necessarily to promise things that you can't necessarily deliver, that you don't know that you're necessarily going to be delivering it for sure.
I see the point. I get it, but a lot of people disagree with me. I think there's a lot to be said for the Swiss style of government, which is a much more direct. It's called direct government, isn't it? So if they're going to make a big decision which is going to affect the public's future, they are obliged to give the public a say in a referendum on that. I mean, they have referendums all the time in Switzerland. I'm not saying you need them a referendum a month or anything like that. But if it's something big that we should have a say on, maybe, such as record amounts of immigration into the country, or net zero that's going to make us all bankrupt, then I think we should be given a say on those policies. And in Switzerland, you would be given a say on those policies.
Oh yeah, I think there's a place for it in certain instances, definitely. Good. Ash, Derek says, Ash is the new Prime Minister and Alistair Deputy Prime Minister.
I won't get out of bed for that money.
I think you'll be making more money on your YouTube videos, actually, these days.
More people listen anyway than what listen to the Prime Minister, I think.
Yes, that's for sure. Catherine says, I'm with you there, Ash, on the whole. Well, listen, Ash, it's the top of the hour. Thank you very much for coming in.
Pleasure.
And for your wise words of wisdom, as always. And we do appreciate you coming on. I know that a lot of our viewers do as well. If they want to see your videos, and you do several short ones a day, they're at youtube.com/that Preston Journalist. And you're also on Twitter, which is now called X. And you are at x.com/AKWriting88. And just go onto YouTube and search That Preston Journalist, and they'll get you anyway. Yep. Okay, Ash, thanks very much for your contribution tonight, and we'll look forward, hopefully, to having you on throughout the year.
Yep, definitely. Thanks very much. I'll speak to you all soon. See you later. Cheers, Alistair.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Fantastic to see Ash, as always, in good fettle. TC says, thanks, Ash. Christopher says, much appreciated, great stuff. Catherine says, thanks, Ash. Now, I never asked the question, but I did say we were going to run through some Brexit photographs before we go. And so I'll ask the question just now, and if we have a winner in 2 or 3 minutes, then the winner will get this. Please send your answer to contact@aforceforgood.uk. And the question is, on this day, A Force for Good defended the Auld Acquaintance Cairn from Scottish nationalists who were trying to defile it. We successfully defended it. Outside which Scottish village is the Auld Acquaintance Cairn? Send in your answer, and in 2 or 3 minutes we'll check if we have got a winner. Send to contact@aforceforgood.uk. Okay, let's look at some pictures from the Great British Brexit Day. Check that out. That appeared in the Daily Mail website the next day. Pro-Brexit supporters gather in George Square, Glasgow, 31st of January 2020, as the UK prepared to leave the European Union. Okay. That picture then appeared in the Sunday Telegraph in that article by Daniel Hannan. Okay, there's me cracking open a bottle of bubbly. That picture appeared in throughout the internet really, but certainly on the Daily Mail website. Okay, and that appeared in the centre spread of the Mail. Okay. That was the banner that we held that says, "We love British independence." And it was a rainy, windy night, but it didn't stop a lot of people coming out. Okay. Bye-bye to the EU. Okay. There's a nice picture of one of our supporters in the rain with a lovely Union Jack umbrella and a Union Jack mobile phone case. And that appeared throughout the internet and was taken by the Press Association. Okay. That's one of our supporters there getting into the mood. Great lad. His name's Jamie. Okay. And there was a short report there from the Daily Telegraph that appeared the next day. And the last 2 paragraphs there state, the pro-Brexit group, A Force for Good, threw a party from 10 p.m. with attendees urged to bring your flags and friends. Quote, Let's remind everyone that over 1 million people in Scotland voted to leave. Our unity will prevail, we will be successful, and Britain's future together is assured, the group said. Yeah, that's worth saying again. Our unity will prevail, we will be successful, and Britain's future together is assured. Fantastic. Okay. Good. We have a winner. Now, I asked the question that the Auld Acquaintance Cairn is outside which Scottish village, and the answer is, of course, Gretna. And the winner is Chris Glenn. Fantastic, Chris. We'll get this sent straight to you tomorrow. Brilliant. Well, we've had a good show, and that was a great guest that we had. And an interesting day. Tam says jail should be the only outcome for Sturgeon. TC says well done, Chris, as does Catherine say congratulations. Hee. Congratulations, Chris Glenn, says Derek. Folks, thanks very much for all your comments and for your engagement tonight. We will be back next Wednesday with another show broadcasting across all our digital platforms. So it just remains for me to say, as always, thank you for watching. God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next time.